And we're going to wrap up the 34th chapter of David Copperfield, which is called My Aunt Amazes Me. Betsy Trotwood and Mr. Dick have both shown up in David's rooms, where Traddles and Miss Krupp are also. "You remember my aunt, Peggotty," said I. For the love of goodness, child, exclaimed my aunt, "don't call the woman by that South Sea Island name. If she is married and got rid of it, which is the best thing she can do, why don't you give her the benefit of change? What is your name now, P?" said my aunt, as a compromise for the obnoxious appellation. "Barkis, ma'am," said Peggotty with a curtsy. "Well, that's human," said my aunt. "It sounds less as if you wanted a missionary. How do you do, Barkis? I hope you're well." Encouraged by these gracious words, and by my aunt's extending her hand, Barkis came forward and took the hand and curtsied her acknowledgment. "We are older than we were, I see," said my aunt. "We have only met each other once before, you know. A nice business we made of it then. Trot, my dear, another cup." I handed it dutifully to my aunt, who was in her usual inflexible state of figure, and ventured a remonstrance with her on the subject of her sitting on a box. "Let me draw the sofa here on the easy-chair, Aunt," said I. "Why should you be so uncomfortable?" "Thank you, Trot," replied my aunt. "I prefer to sit upon my property." Here my aunt looked hard at Mrs. Krupp and observed, "We needn't trouble you to wait, ma'am." "Shall I put a little more tea in the pot before I go, ma'am?" said Mrs. Krupp. "No, I thank you, ma'am," replied my aunt. "Would you let me fetch you another pat of butter, ma'am?" said Mrs. Krupp. "Or would you be persuaded to try a new laid egg? Or should I brile a rasher? There ain't nothing I could do for your dear aunt, Mr. Copperfield." "Nothing, ma'am," returned my aunt. "I shall do very well, I thank you." I knew my aunt sufficiently well to know that she had something of importance on her mind, and that there was far more matter in this arrival than a stranger might have supposed. As I knew she would only speak in her own good time, I sat down near her and spoke to the birds, and played with the cat, and it was as easy as I could be. "Trot," said my aunt at last, when she had finished her tea and carefully smoothed down her dress and wiped her lips. "You needn't go, Barkis. Trot, have you got to be firm and self-reliant?" "I hope so, Aunt." "What do you think?" inquired Miss Betsy. "I think so, Aunt." "Then why, my love," said my aunt, looking earnestly at me, "why do you think I prefer to sit upon this property of mine tonight?" I shook my head, unable to guess. "Because," said my aunt, "it's all I have, because I'm ruined, my dear." If the house and every one of us had tumbled into the river together, I could hardly have received a greater shock. "Dick knows it," said my aunt, laying her hand calmly on my shoulder. "I am ruined, my dear Trot. All I have in the world is in this room, except the cottage, and that I have left Janet to let. Barkis, I want to get a bed for this gentleman tonight. To save expense, perhaps you can make up something here for myself. Anything will do. It's only for tonight. We'll talk about this more tomorrow." I was roused from my amazement and concern for her, I am sure, by her falling on my neck for a moment and crying that she only grieved for me. In another moment she suppressed this emotion, and said with an aspect more triumphant than dejected, "We must meet reverses boldly and not suffer them to frighten us, my dear. We must learn to act the play out. We must live misfortunes down, Trot." And that is the end of chapter 34.